All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our latest CA Workload Automation Community webcast. Today we're joined by Todd Michaels and Gene Rissmeller from the Workload Automation team. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Since I know most of you are listening to this via the audio broadcast in WebEx, you can't ask questions on the phone that way. So what we'd like to ask you to do is use the Q&A box in the WebEx to ask your questions. If you don't see the Q&A box in the lower right of your screen right now, there's a question mark icon in the upper right. If you click on that, the box will open for you, and you can ask your questions in there, and that way we can make sure that we answer as many of them as possible in our time together today. That's all I have, so I'm going to hand things off to Gene, who's going to do a quick intro, and then we'll get started with Todd on the presentation itself. Go ahead, Gene.
Hi, thank you, Len. Welcome everyone to this presentation on CA Workload Automation in the Cloud, Breaking Down Barriers. I'm Gene Rissmeller. I'm product marketing for our CA Automation business unit here at CA Technologies. Todd Michaels, principal consultant here with CA, will be delivering the presentation today, and as Len mentioned, we'll hold the Q&A for the end. So Todd, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Gene. As Gene mentioned, we're going to go over CA Workload Automation in the cloud. And I just want to take you through a couple of different experiences, what we've done with other customers, what their experiences are, and how they were successful. So in doing that, I'm going to start out with, talking about the modern software factory and where CA sees the success of companies. Why some companies are choosing the cloud. Then we'll go on to what things you want to consider when you're going to move to the cloud as it relates to workload automation. Take a look at the different types of deployments, not very complex. There's different ways I'm going to take a look at a high level of how to deploy it or what the different configurations can be. Then we'll take a look at the different use cases. I got a couple of different use cases that we can see as far as what the company has done, where they deployed the different areas, where they deployed the different servers and the applications, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So over the past several years, CA has been working with a lot of companies to understand what they've been doing to be successful and been able to see where they've been coming from, because as of late, most companies are finding that their end users are demanding a lot more from them. And they're seeing that there's very little brand loyalty, if any. So they have to deliver a very high level of service in order to keep those customers. So with that, they've been identifying these key areas to focus on to be successful. And we've been recognizing a pattern that the customers or these companies that have been successful are focusing on agility, automation, insights, and security. And to that end, they've been able to put all of those together to create a successful end user experience or a successful and pleasant customer experience. What CA's come up with is what we call the modern software factory. By putting all of these components together, or a blueprint for the success of putting these components together, and being able to deliver that type of experience to the customer, being able to be agile, to be able to deliver new technologies, new updates as quickly as possible, automating all of those components so that you're efficient and effective, being able to share insights and throughout groups and information so that you're not making the same mistakes or that you're bringing out all the best information. And then also security, making sure the environment is secure as it is on your own site, or if it were, protected in your wallet. So with those things, what we're starting to identify are what are the barriers. And some people, as you're looking at the different ways of identifying or developing a modern software factory, is what are the barriers that are keeping you from that? What are the barriers keeping you from being agile, automating and secure and providing that insight? today I want to talk to you about how breaking through some of those barriers can help by putting workload automation into the cloud. Okay, by utilizing workload automation in different services such as Amazon, such as Microsoft Azure or Oracle Cloud infrastructure. So we're going to look at breaking down those different barriers and taking advantage of being a lot more agile. So before I get started into talking about cloud, obviously the cloud does bring upon a lot of different nomenclatures, a lot of different definitions, and it means different things to different people. So I just want to provide some clarity as to what I'll be talking about today and what I'm referring to. So there's three primary cloud definitions, and there are variations on these. There's more. First one is infrastructure as a service. Now, infrastructure as a service is pretty much the company is providing, or the service provider is providing the hardware to you from their remote site so that you can install an operating system, start from scratch, and be able to do what you want from there. There's a lot more flexibility. There's a lot more ability to be able to install what you want and be able to create different areas. So infrastructure is the bare metal or bare component that they'll provide to you so that you have compute services. And a couple of examples of those are Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Oracle Cloud infrastructure. Those are just a few examples. Now, platform as a service is a little bit the next layer that's on top of the infrastructure. And this is providing different types of services. Maybe it's providing different applications to you, like a database, so that you can pull these different components together to build applications on top of. So if you want a web server, if you want a database component, if you want other types of components such as that to be able to build upon, you go to a company that delivers platform as a service. Now, a few that are providing that capability is Google Application Engine, OpenShift or Red Hat OpenShift, and then Heroku. And then the last one is software as a service. Now, software as a service is just pretty much they're providing you a full-blown application, and you're utilizing that technology to accomplish what you need. They're taking full care of the full stack from hardware to software, all the different components. You get an interface that you work with and you integrate with or communicate through a web page. Now, this is probably one of the most frequently used, at least in my experience, from an end user perspective. And there's the different ones. Examples of this are Salesforce, Workday, Concur. There are many others out there, but these are just some of the more popular ones. So I just wanted to give this brief definitions. Now today I'm going to be focusing on infrastructure as a service and how CA works in that type of infrastructure and how we can take advantage of it. So with that, one thing, why the cloud? Why are customers looking at cloud technology? Why do they want to do that? I'll go back to why the modern software factory and how companies are looking to be successful. One is flexibility and agility. They're able to provide new services more quickly around that. So think about some of the days that you had to request a new server or a new computer or anything like that. Sometimes that could take days, weeks, depending upon how busy other companies, the other departments are, or how long the purchasing process takes. By utilizing infrastructure as a service or a cloud, you can order that and have a machine spun up in a matter of minutes, if hours, if not minutes. I've requested a few different machines from Amazon Web Services, and had those machines up and running within minutes and being able to install the have the operating system installed, and then started configuring it and everything like that quickly. Another reason is there's less overhead and administration. Now, obviously, you still have to administer the operating system, the logs, and everything like that to make sure that it's still working properly, but there is less of it. You don't have to worry about all the different components of an operating system. There is less overhead because you don't have to worry about the hardware tasks or maintaining the hardware to your extent. There's also less overhead in having to apply updates to the operating system and all other areas. So to that end, there are a lot of less overhead and administration. Well, the next one, reduced CapEx costs, so capital expenditures. This is obvious, more or less an obvious one. If the hardware isn't in your data center and it's somewhere else and somebody else is paying for it, then this is no longer something that you own the hardware, so it's somewhere else. So you're reducing that capital expenditure cost, putting it in maybe in the OpEx bucket where you may have some more dollars. It allows you also to optimize more resources, optimize the resources that you have, or to be able to move from place to place. One thing, if you just purchase a new server and you're using 10% of it, but it's got to be a dedicated server, you can't just, you have to order a new server. So you're not optimizing the existing hardware that you have. With the infrastructure or cloud compute, you can just provision a new machine and utilize what you need. When you're done with it, you can just turn it off, and most web services have a pay-as-you-go method, or pay-as-you-go, so, or pay per utilization. So if you're no longer utilizing it, you shut it off, you're no longer paying for it at that point. You bring it back up, then you're paying for it. So with that said, you can optimize your resources. And then last and not least is reliability and availability. So reliability and availability, because of these infrastructure as a service companies, they're taking care of making sure the systems are available. They're taking care of making sure they're up and running. And based upon different configurations, you can have your information in what we call what they're called multiple zones. So that if one zone goes down, say on the East Coast, it can come up in the West Coast. So it's reliable and it's constant and it's readily available for disaster recovery purposes, for high availability, things such as that. All right. So moving on. So those are some of the reasons that I've heard customers say why they're moving to the cloud. Now, some of the different implementations of that I've seen or that you can do within the cloud is automation server in the cloud with the workload on-premise. So if you have the AutoSys server in Amazon Web Services hosted on a Red Hat box up there, and all of your applications are local in your data center, that's one configuration. Another configuration is having the AutoSys, is the reverse, is having the AutoSys server or the automation server in your data center and workload in the cloud and on-premise, so you have a hybrid environment with your applications, but you would have your automation server on-prem. And then the last one is having everything in the cloud. Your applications are in the cloud, all your workload is in the cloud, and your automation server is in the cloud. So with that, these are the different types of configurations you would generally have. I mean, there could be some other variations where you're including other components such as SaaS, or you're including something else as in another data center or anything about that. All right. So some of the things to consider when you're going to the cloud, when you're bringing your workload automation into the cloud. First is, what OS are you going to use? Most most infrastructure as a service companies allow x86 platforms, so it's either a Linux platform or a Windows platform. And CA Workload Automation AE, or AutoSys, supports those platforms. So it's Red Hat, usually Red Hat and Windows are the primary platforms of choice. Where are my applications? Where do they reside? A lot of customers ask us what we recommend. Should we have our automation server on-premise? Should we have our automation server in the cloud? Where would you recommend it? And the response is, where are your applications primarily, and where will they be in the next 3 to 5 years? If your goal is to have 100% in the cloud, then obviously you want to put your workload automation server in the cloud. If you're going to have some applications in the cloud, but most of them are going to remain on-prem or in your data center, then it's probably more beneficial to keep the workload automation server in your data center, depending upon what you want to do. Okay, and then lastly, but you need to consider also what ports need to be opened or what need to be communicated. This is probably the #1 difficulty we've seen with companies have when they've deployed to the cloud, is making sure the communication ports or the appropriate applications and services can communicate with one another across different areas. So making sure the appropriate ports are open and that you set the appropriate security policies. And that goes.
Hi, can I just interrupt and ask a question, please?
Yes, please. Please.
My question I understand what you're describing. So, how close is CA to coming up with a solution, either with AutoSys or some other solution, for a scheduler that runs within the cloud, traditionally the way a cloud scheduler would run? Are you guys working on anything for that, or maybe integrating AutoSys into the cloud so it runs the way a traditional cloud scheduler would run, spinning up, running, and then going away?
So am I correct? Are you suggesting something along the lines of like SaaS, providing workload as a service?
Yeah, something other than just running AutoSys the way we run it right now, with the possibilities that you described. Right. Other than that, is CA coming up with anything new that will run in the cloud more like a traditional cloud-type scheduler?
Right. So I don't know offhand. I don't have the details offhand whether we're working on that. We are always investigating how we can improve upon the cloud. We know that providing cloud services and providing application services and being more cloud-friendly is important, and that is a priority to us. I don't know if in the roadmap specifically that we are providing that. Now, we are working with being able to integrate with containers, so that and that would maybe go along the lines of what you're referring to, is being able to just create a container, expand it, run some workload from that, and then diminish it. So that is something that we are looking at, and that is something that we are actively reviewing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. So the next is, do I want to implement HA and disaster, high availability and disaster recovery when you're considering how you're going to deploy it? The reason being is if you're not concerned about disaster recovery for the cloud purposes, you can configure it and just install the application in one area, and then have the services provider provide high availability. The server will be up consistently, or you can configure it in multiple areas, and I'll show you a couple of examples for that, so that area goes down, or if, we've been having a lot of hurricanes around lately, if hurricanes takes out one of the data centers, it will automatically come up in another data center, and being able to configure it that way. And I'll show you an example of that shortly. All right, so these are just some of the things to consider. There are other things that you want to consider as you're looking more deeply into this, but today's idea is just to give you a taste and an understanding of what can be done and how it can be done. So one of the use cases that we're looking at is CA has decided to start utilizing Amazon Web Services for their infrastructure as a service. They've decided to deploy CA Workload Automation AE into the cloud, and or formerly AutoSys, and just deploy that out there. What are they integrating it with? They're integrating it primarily with SAP, Informatica, a few other scripting applications, other applications that they've written for themselves, for reports, for auditing, payroll, things such as that. So, and that's what AutoSys is currently automating within CA. It's doing all the financial balancing the books, it's doing payroll, it's synchronizing employee information, it's doing audit and production control. So why did we move to the cloud? Why did we go there? These are some of the specific reasons that we looked at, and what CA is looking to reduce as much overhead as possible for the system maintenance, for the administration that I was talking about earlier. So that was a primary factor in this. If we move to the cloud, we don't have to worry about the hardware, we don't have to worry about those resources. We wanted to implement true high availability and disaster recovery without having a secondary disaster recovery site. Okay, CA does have multiple data centers for disaster recovery, but with the way we've configured it, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment, we've configured it so that if something happens to one of the service areas, that it will come up in the second service area. And then the last, one of the other reasons that we've considered that is cost savings on development systems. So being able to get new applications, new systems for development on demand is difficult when you're doing everything within your data center. So we've looked at, and by having the development systems in the cloud or as an infrastructure as a service, we're able to bring up machines and pay for when they're being utilized, not when they're turned off, not when they're not being utilized, or not when they're deleted and we want to create a new system. So this is some of the primary reasons of why we've moved our workload automation to the cloud. Now the way this looks is we've configured it so that we have AutoSys installed in two separate zones. One's on the east zone and the other's on the west zone. Now these aren't separate instances, they're all the same instance. So we've configured it with a primary and a shadow scheduler in high availability. The primary scheduler is in the east zone and the shadow scheduler is in the west zone. This way, like I said, the way we have it configured, we have the databases are being synchronized. The EEM servers, or the security components, have multi-write set up so they're being written to both simultaneously. And for Workload Control Center, we have a load balancer for the users to be able to monitor for the browser to automatically fail over. So that if something is to happen to the AWS East zone, the primary scheduler fails over to the shadow scheduler, and the AWS West zone kicks in, and that starts taking over all of this. So it happens for both, whether it's high availability or disaster recovery, because we're talking about servers or the infrastructure being on the East Coast. If something happens on the East Coast, then it fails over to the West Coast. So the way we've implemented it is to provide not just high availability, but also true disaster recovery. So like I said, if we just had a hurricane still sitting a couple hundred miles away from here, if that were to come and hit Amazon Web Services data center, then that would have taken out the AWS East zone and then put it over to the west. So that this way you have that type of disaster recovery and high availability. Now, each of these servers are communicating with the different agents that are in CA's data center. So we have an SAP implementation, we have other application servers, we have Informatica, we have all of these other agents that are within our data center that AutoSys is communicating with. So as long as we provide the appropriate communication ports and communication areas, we'll be able to communicate back and forth as if it was our own data center. And that is something that I'd like you to keep in mind. Implementing this infrastructure or implementing AutoSys in the cloud or workload automation in the cloud is just like implementing it in a remote data center. All right, as long as you have network connectivity, as long as you are able to communicate with those different areas, it's just like having it in your data center. Okay, so as those components fail over and it runs just the same as it would like that. Now, this configuration is for the latest release of AutoSys, and as you can see, they're using Microsoft SQL Server as a back-end database. They are CA. We are using RDS, for those of you familiar with what that is. It's basically Amazon's database component that they provide as a service, and we're able to utilize that. Our GIS, or our internal IT department, created or worked with our development and utilized an unsupported workaround. So we are working on certifying RDS as a back end, but as of today, we have an unsupported workaround to make it work if that's something that's a requirement for you. All right, but this is how we have it configured today, and this is one of the options. The other company that I wanted to give you an example is a large global retailer, and they've pushed, their goal is to put everything into the cloud. They don't want anything in the data center, move all of their components, all of the applications, whether it be SaaS, whether it be infrastructure as a service, they want to get rid of all of their data center, or as much as possible, and put everything there. And what workload automation is doing for them, it's similar applications. They're using Informatica, SAP Business Warehouse, and other SAP components. So they're all utilizing several of those. And really, they're using it so if AutoSys isn't working, stuff doesn't ship. Customers don't get what they want. There's guys just standing around on the docks waiting for information. So if you can't ship, you can't get orders. You can't make money. So this retailer heavily depends upon AutoSys for their business. And why they chose to move to the cloud, they had three primary components. They wanted to double the speed to create new products, double the speed to the market, and double its interactions with the customers. And the only way they can do this is by moving to the cloud, by being able to have the flexibility of developing new applications, having the agility to be able to meet the new market needs, having the ability to deploy the applications quickly and responsibly, and being able to see those customers and interact with the customers directly through the cloud. And they've put together three primary initiatives to support this: automation, cloud, and disaster recovery. They put together each of those, and they call it what's called a triple-double, for those of you familiar with a basketball. So these are the primary reasons that they were looking at, that they've moved to the cloud and what they've done. Now, their configuration isn't that much different from what I've showed you within SAP, but if you flop it around, they're on the West Coast, so they have their primary in the West. They're using Oracle as their back end. This was installed, this Oracle database was installed on one of the servers, so they're not using RDS. But everything else about the AutoSys configuration is pretty much the same. It's running on Linux servers instead of Windows, the other platform, and they set it up very similar to what we were just talking about. This has become more or less a best practice for high availability and disaster recovery purposes, and what we've been seeing successful. So if you're looking for that, this is what you want to consider. You want to have it that way. The primary differences between their deployment and their configuration and CA's is that their application servers are also in the cloud. All of their application services are either in Amazon Web Services or their software as a service. And by having those different components, they have very little infrastructure at all within their data centers. And the communications is the same with that. So this is how they've set it up. They felt that the different areas, being able to create new applications, deploy applications, they're using automation to deploy their different applications. They're using different technologies to make sure the applications are up and running. But as you can see by those two separate examples of AutoSys and how they have it, how we can configure it, AutoSys can run in the cloud. AutoSys can be very dynamic in the cloud. Now, there can be a third example, which I didn't go through, of having AutoSys on-prem and the applications in the cloud. And it wouldn't be much different than what you're doing today if you're running AutoSys and having it configured so that it's just reading information from the agents that reside in the cloud. Whereas from the CA example, all of the agents are within CA's data center. For the large retailer, their agents reside all in the cloud, whether they are on the AutoSys servers or on the application servers. So everything is in the cloud, nothing's on their data center. So those are the different examples, and I just want to go through those so that I can share some of what some of our customers have done, how they've been successful, what they've configured, and go through that. So what it provides is the agility to be able to create new applications, to create new integrations, to create new areas of working, and the flexibility of being able to bring something to market quicker and faster. And it's also reliability, because you have high availability, disaster recovery by having that basic configuration of deploying the agents or deploying the servers in different areas without having to have your own data centers across the globe. And then there's resource optimization, being able to utilize what you need when you need it, not necessarily having stuff on site that's not being utilized or having to wait for it to be ordered. So that resource optimization. So I'm going to conclude with that, but and I'm going to address any questions that show up in the Q&A area. But if you are looking for more information about cloud and AutoSys, you can, and CA Workload Automation in general, reach out to your solution account manager, and they can set up a one-on-one session with the pre-sales person, and they can talk more in depth about what we're doing today and how to set that up. All right. So with that, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A session. Yeah. Okay. So one of the questions are, what are the service ports to open? So if I go back, best be answered by taking a look at the configuration. So in CA's configuration, there's two primary ports that we need to open when going back and forth. And it's the same ports that you would open if you're doing it on your own data center. And I'm talking about with firewall configurations. The agents, so the SAP agent or system agent that's in the data center, that's 7520. That's the default agent. Now, as you install, each agent can be configured for different ports, but that's the default one. That's the one you want to open up, coming into your data center or coming into the server. There's a number of different ports that you would open for the different servers, but the primary one for each server communicating within the data center, there's different ports you'd open to communicate between those. But the primary going back from the data center to the workload automation primary server or the shadow server is 7507 or 7500. So those two are the ports that you want to communicate back with the server. So that's where you would want to take a look at. Like I said, there's a number of different ports that would need to be communicated with between all of these servers, and we do have documentation on what each of those ports are. Either look at it, you can take a look at our documentation to find all the ports, or like I said, reach out to the solution account manager, and he'll be able to discuss that with you. All right, let's see, next question. I'm curious why this cloud discussion would be AE specific, since D-Series would already be distributed solution, unless we're just trying to have a discussion. So the question equates to, why is this discussion about AE specific versus DE for workload automation? So this could be looked at in a similar fashion to DE. We just, and we may have a specific session on DE itself. The configurations that we came up with for this example were for AutoSys or AE only. And looking at it, that's the one that we focused on first.
Todd, do you have time for a verbal question?
Sure.
Okay, quick question. You mentioned that your CA is running using RDS as the back end for their SQL servers, and you're using an unsupported workaround to give you HA across, I'm guessing, 2 regions, not 2 availability zones. Is that correct, between East and West?
I'd like to, actually that's, if that's the way it sounded, that's not what I was referring to. The unsupported workaround is making RDS work. But today, CA Workload Automation does not support RDS. We're coming up with a release in the near future that's planned to have that support, but that's what's unsupported. As far as the synchronization between the 2 databases, that's on Amazon's side, and they're synchronizing those databases.
Okay, while you're using RDS, but for a traditional HA instance, we would have 2 separate EC2 Oracle instances running in hot mode like we would for a normal data center install, correct?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so another question was, how do you handle time zone issues? Do you always pair the scheduler and the database in each zone? So the time zone issues, that's a good question. How do we handle those? That's something that I'm going to have to find out about. So I would say, because the workload itself isn't necessarily moving, and that should reside in the same time zone, but you're talking about the scheduler, so that's going to depend on that. So within AutoSys, we do have the ability to specify what time zone the scheduler runs on, or what the calendar runs through. So if you specify the time zone, it will automatically assume that time zone within the schedules. So you're able to take care of that when you create the calendars and when you create the schedules. So the time zone can be specified. Okay. Does CA work with you to help move to the cloud, or do we have to deal with it? CA can help you. And, we do have services that you can, we can have you work with our services to help you move to the cloud. We've helped other customers move to the cloud as far as services is concerned. If you have questions or how things work and things like that, like I said, reach out to your solution account manager. We can discuss some different details and work with you on how that can happen. All right, let's see. How do you deal with agent restarts or other actions requiring commands into the scheduler application server? So this question, how do you deal with agent restarts? As you would with any other, and maybe I'm not clear on what that's asking. How do you deal with agent restarts? If the agent has to stop and restart, or it's as if consider it this way, or I think it's what you're asking, is this is like being in your own data center. If you need to restart something on a Linux box, you have SSH to it. If you need to restart something on a Windows box, you have remote desktop. So you can restart the agent services or configure that. If you're talking about for the high availability and disaster recovery, how do you deal with the agent and other application service restarts? AutoSys detects those restarts. So if an agent isn't available, it will go in an offline state. When it becomes available again, it'll detect that it's in an online state and will resume running the workload. If that's not what you're referring to, you can send me an email and I'll help you out with that.
Todd, can I ask a follow-up on that one?
Please.
So is there a mechanism that's standard that we can use? Because if we have application servers that are going to in the cloud that are going to be online only during processing and then offline, say for 12 hours a day, and we don't want to get alerted on the machine being offline, is that something that we need to customize based on whatever monitoring tool we have outside of AutoSys, or is there a way to suppress AutoSys from generating those machine unavailable alerts for a period of time?
So you'd probably have to suppress them within AutoSys, otherwise it's going to generate those alerts. But how can you suppress those alerts? So if a machine goes offline because you're shutting down the machines?
Yes.
So if depending upon how the agent goes down, if you're shutting down the agent gracefully, it's going to send an alert, and then it's going to say that the agent's going down. So if it goes down gracefully, it'll just show up in an offline state and shouldn't send out an alert. That's my understanding of how it'll work. I'm going to verify that, though.
Okay, great.
Sure. Let's see. Just want to write that note down. All right. So yeah, I'll follow up on that. So next question, did you find the cloud-based solution more cost-effective? Most customers, and we have found it more cost-effective for the different reasons that I'm talking about. That wasn't the primary reason that we're looking at it, or that why companies have gone to it. The net is usually more cost-effective because you're able to get out to the market. You're able to produce new applications quicker, everything like that. Have we saved money because we're in the cloud? I don't think there's really that much of a difference as far as when it comes to that, because you're paying for the services, you are paying for that, you are getting more optimized resources and the like. So you may see cost savings, but I don't know that there'll be a significant one depending upon how you're configuring it and how you're implementing it. All right. Question is there any more that you can tell us about scheduling in Docker containers? So today with Docker containers, we can work with a Docker container manager. We've created scripts within CA that will communicate with the Docker container manager to provision a new container, have it run workload, and then deprovision that container or have that delete that container. So if you'd like, we can reach out to the solution account manager, and you can have more of an in-depth conversation with that. But we have some live demonstrations for that that you can do. Let's say, what technologies are you leaning towards? In terms of containers for AutoSys, what technologies, CA is agnostic. What I'm hearing most of is, there's all different container technologies out there, and we'll work with most of them. We're talking with our customers. The ones that our customers are using most frequently are the ones that we'll come out with and usually integrate with more frequently. I don't know the specific ones that we're working on right now, but that's something that we can talk about later. How to migrate the data from on-premise to the cloud. I'm not clear what that question is asking. How to migrate the data from on-prem to the cloud. Okay. I'm going to jump past that question. I'm not clear. If you can jump in and bring yourself off mute, but I know I only got a few more minutes before I have to jump off. Let's see. Audio is basically down right now. Somebody's saying the audio is no longer working. Okay.
Yeah, Todd. It seems to be working okay on my end, and I haven't heard anything else about it. So maybe it was just a one-off. So just
okay.
keep going. Keep going.
All right. Okay. All right. So, and the last one actually does say that, yeah, it does detect that the agent went down. If it does go down gracefully, that there is an alarm. So I'll follow up. Can we suppress the agent down alert for this? So I'll find out about that.
And Todd, this is Gene. I asked that question, and actually, I think we're on a call tomorrow. So
okay. Excellent, Gene.
I'll save it for there. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So how does this impact WCC, JAWS, or IDASH connectivity? Do you need those tools in the cloud as well? In the configuration that you're looking at right now in AutoSys, WCC is in the cloud, and we have a load balancer between those, so they're able to do that. You can configure IDASH and JAWS to communicate that way as well. You'd have to set it up for those communications. All right, and if going to cloud-based AutoSys, does that change CA support? No. CA will support. We have certified the different web or infrastructure as a service technologies. More specifically, we've certified Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. We expect that it will work the same in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and we'll give you best support around that. All right. And I believe, what? Nope, there's more. So, okay. Let's see. I meant data. How is data migrated from on-prem to the cloud? You can do this. You can export your data using either just picking up the database, putting it into the cloud, or you can use a couple of different methods of exporting the data to GIL files and putting it in a new implementation. But that can be discussed more in detail as far as how the data itself. What we did is we just made a copy of the database and moved it into the cloud after we've had everything all together. All right. And then, what is the best way to migrate the data? Yeah, that's something that we can have a deeper conversation. Reach out to your solution account manager, and we'll talk about what the different options are, what's the best way to do that to migrating the data based upon what you have available to you. All right. So as I mentioned, if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to your solution account manager, and we can set up one-on-ones either with me or another pre-sales rep that we can talk to and get more in-depth about that. I have a couple that I've already set up, as you heard Gene talk about. So please feel free to reach out, and we'll get to the different questions you have. Otherwise, thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope you have a good day.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Gene. Have a good day, everybody.